At the head of a golden dining table, glittering with chandeliers, Gregory Alcott leaned back in his leather chair, smirking with the confidence of a man who thought money made him untouchable. He waved a sheet of foreign writing in the air and mocked his maid, "Translate this and my salary is yours." The room roared with laughter. Everyone expected her to shrink, to stay silent, to accept the humiliation. But what happened next stunned every guest into silence. And turned the entire night upside down. If you love shocking, jaw-dropping stories where the underestimated rise and flip the script, you're in the right place. Tap subscribe here now and turn on notifications, because these unforgettable stories of power, pride, and savage reversals are only getting bigger, and you don't want to miss the next explosive twist. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors, stretching down the endless hallway of Gregory Alcott's mansion, a space so opulent that even silence seemed expensive. Chandeliers the size of small cars swayed above polished tables, their crystals dripping light across walls, hung with oil paintings of ancestors who had never known hunger. Tonight the air smelled like imported cigars, truffle butter, and the arrogance of men who believed themselves untouchable. Gregory sat at the head of the table, flanked by his entourage, other wealthy executives who laughed loudly at half-baked jokes and clinked glasses full of 100-year-old cognac. He leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, tilting his glass lazily, a smirk slithering across his smooth, groomed face. At 62, he had built skyscrapers, flattened competitors, and consumed headlines. Wealth hadn't just bought him power, it had bought him an unshakable conviction that the world was his stage. At the far edge of the room, nearly invisible, Naomi adjusted the napkins on the polished dining table. She wore a crisp black uniform, collar neat, apron tied tight, the quiet armor of servitude. Every command she obeyed came filtered through the invisible wall that had always stood between her and the men she worked for. Here she wasn't Naomi. She was MAID, a silent pair of hands, unseen unless forgotten wine needed pouring. Gregory hardly acknowledged her presence, but when his laughter carried too loudly, when arrogance grew bored with the echo of itself, it inevitably sought out a target. And tonight, Naomi became the canvas. "Naomi," Gregory called suddenly, his voice slicing through the chatter like an arrow. "Come closer." Her steps echoed softly against the floor, heart steady though she already felt where this was headed. She kept her chin slightly lowered. Deference, always deference, and stopped just a few feet from him. Gregory swirled his glass with a flourish, eyeing her the way one might appraise a painting for flaws. Then, with a smirk, he lifted his other hand. In it, a single sheet of paper filled with elegant black characters, strokes formed with precision, a foreign script Naomi recognized instantly, though she gave no indication. "Translate this," he said, the alcohol in his tone sharpening his arrogance. "And my salary is yours." The room erupted with chuckles, throaty guffaws spilling over each other. His friends leaned back in their chairs, slapping the table as if the joke were already complete. Naomi stared at the page, the characters swimming familiar and sharp before her eyes. Japanese. Every slant and curve pulled memories from another life. Afternoons in Kyoto gardens with her mother, folded paper cranes stacked gently on her childhood desk, the cadence of words she had carried deep inside since before she ever learned the weight of mockery. But she didn't move. The men's laughter thickened. Gregory leaned forward, eyes gleaming, the predator sure of his kill. "What's wrong, Naomi?" "Not in your vocabulary bank." "Don't worry. None of us expected much." She remained still, face poised, eyes steady. The wine glasses glittered under the chandelier like an audience watching for her collapse. For Gregory, it was amusement. For Naomi, it was something heavier. The ache of every whispered slight, every time wealth mistook her silence for stupidity. Here it was again, a dinner table turned stage, men using ceremony to dress up cruelty. Her fingers itched, but her voice remained controlled. "Translate it," Gregory taunted again. He leaned back carelessly, tossing the paper onto the table as if it were trash. "Do that and my salary is yours." The laughter rippled again. Not polite, but savage. Naomi glanced at the paper. She hadn't asked for this moment, but destiny had a way of piercing through marble walls. The characters stared back, and in them she saw her mother's shadow. The lessons of language, the rhythm of respect, the weight of silence. Naomi felt a flicker ignite in her chest, small but bright. Gregory smirked wider. "Go on then," he urged, as though daring her to lose. Naomi inhaled slowly. She remembered the footsteps that had brought her this far, the lessons swallowed to survive in rooms designed to erase her. And then, with measured calm, she lifted her head. Her voice, when it came, wasn't tentative. It was clear, precise, every syllable cutting through the air like steel wrapped in silk. She translated the passage flawlessly, her Japanese carrying the cadence of remembrance, her English flowing after with a conviction no one at the table had expected. The room fell silent. The smirks faltered. Glasses paused mid-air. Gregory's jaw twitched, his arrogance cracking just slightly beneath the impact of something more powerful than wealth, truth. For a man who had always treated language as currency he could buy, Naomi had just revealed a fortune greater than his own. And in that silence, weightier than all their laughter, Naomi stood taller than anyone in the room. For a few suspended seconds, the only sound in the great dining hall was the faint chime of the chandelier's crystals swaying above. Gregory's laugh had died mid-breath, cut off by the resonance of Naomi's voice. His friends stared at her as though she had twisted physics itself. A maid had not just spoken, she had commanded the air, and the air had listened. Naomi lowered her eyes deliberately, breaking contact as though nothing remarkable had just happened, and stepped backward toward her post against the wall. To her, language wasn't a trick or a spectacle, it was memory. It was bloodline. But to everyone at the table it had become humiliation. Gregory's humiliation. And for men like him, humiliation was intolerable. He cleared his throat harshly, attempting to regain his composure. His fingers tightened around the stem of his cognac glass until his knuckles blanched. A smirk tried to return to his lips, but it carried the stiffness of forced pride. "Well," he barked, his voice an octave too high, "seems our help has a hidden talent." Everyone applauded. The table erupted into shallow claps, uneasy chuckles following. But the tone wasn't celebratory. It was awkward, brittle, like porcelain on the brink of shattering. Naomi bowed her head slightly, not from submission but to mask the expression tugging her lips. She had lived an entire life being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. Tonight, at Gregory's expense, that invisibility had cracked open into light. Gregory drained his glass in one gulp and waved for another. "Let's not get carried away," he muttered quickly. "She probably rehearsed it." Lucky coincidence. But the truth lingered. His guests had seen it in his eyes, in his faltering grin, in the silence that had devoured his mocking laughter. Naomi had done what none of them expected, stood resolute in dignity, while the emperor exposed the frayed edges of his crown. Dinner resumed in staggered waves. Forks clinked. Small talk floated, but a tremor of discomfort hummed beneath the surface. Naomi continued her duties, slipping between chairs, refilling glasses, adjusting plates. Yet every motion came with an aura that had not been there an hour ago. The room no longer looked through her. It looked over its shoulder at her. Gregory noticed it too. The way conversation bent awkwardly when she neared. The way eyes darted to the paper he had thrown down like discarded game. The way Naomi had robbed him of the final laugh. And his pride, swollen and fragile like glass, sought retaliation. "Naomi," he called again, voice booming with a forced joviality, the kind men use to hide simmering rage. "You're full of surprises tonight." She approached calmly, her features neutral. "You know, gentlemen," Gregory continued toward his friends, "I think we should give her another challenge. Since she's our evening's entertainment." The room tensed. No one stopped him. Wealth had a way of convincing itself that cruelty was amusement. He tapped the rim of his empty glass with a ringed finger. "Sing for us," he said bluntly. "A song from wherever you learned that tongue. Something exotic. Let's hear you perform." His friends exchanged uncertain glances, but no one intervened. Naomi's breath caught briefly. It wasn't the request itself, but the tone. A command meant to shrink her back down, to bend the moment of her triumph into another note in his orchestrated mockery. Naomi straightened her shoulders. Inside her chest simmered a familiar ache, the ache her mother had prepared her for in every unspoken lesson. There will be rooms that will try to erase you, but erasure only works if you let them. No? "Sir," she said softly but firmly. Gregory's brows shot upward. The guests blinked as though someone had shattered one of his windows. A maid refusing, no? Gregory repeated, his voice knife-edged. She met his glare without wavering. "I'm here to serve the meal, not to be the meal." The words weren't loud, but they rang like thunder slipping beneath the doorframe, heavy and undeniable. The table froze. Even the flames in the candelabras wavered. For the first time in a long time, Gregory found himself speechless. He blinked at her as if he had misheard, as though the maid he had dismissed as background had just dared speak truth into the teeth of his arrogance. One of his friends, emboldened by discomfort, forced a chuckle. "Greg, come now, don't let the help spoil the mood." But the mood was already spoiled. Naomi bowed politely, then turned her focus back to pouring wine for a guest at the far end of the table. Her composure stunned them more than a scream ever would have. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't stormed out, hadn't cracked, but she had placed Gregory himself on trial without raising a finger. Gregory's pride shattered inward like glass thrown against stone. His smile stiffened again, though it no longer reached his eyes. Rage simmered beneath his shirt collar, a rage not at the maid in front of him, but at the reflection she cast back, of a man robbed of dominance. Dinner limped toward its end. His guests talked louder than necessary, filling the cracks with exaggerated laughter about meaningless topics. Naomi continued her cadence of service, but the room had already shifted. With every step she took, Gregory's loss became more glaring. When plates were cleared and the men shuffled into the drawing room for cigars and port, Gregory remained behind a moment longer. Naomi stacked the last plates, her back turned. His eyes drilled into her. "Enjoy this night, Naomi," he whispered sharply, low enough for only her to hear, "because it will be your last. Tomorrow you'll be gone from this house." Her hand froze briefly on the silver tray, but she did not turn. She simply replied, her tone steady, "Perhaps, but you'll never erase what happened here tonight. They saw it, you saw it, and you'll remember." Gregory's jaw flexed, teeth gritted. He stormed toward the door, every footstep echoing like a man trying to convince himself he still commanded the room. And Naomi stood in the hollow of the chandelier's light, not broken, not small, but steady, carrying within her the quiet power to shift even the walls built to contain her silence. The drawing room smelled like smoke and wood polish, a haze of cigar clouds hanging low as Gregory's guests postured in leather armchairs. Their laughter was louder, rowdier now, forced to fill the space that humiliation had hollowed out in the dining hall. But beneath the noise, cracks remained. They had all seen it. A maid who shouldn't have mattered had become the punctuation mark to a story Gregory couldn't end. The weight of his silence after her refusal lingered, etched sharper in memory than any of his boasts. Naomi, in the kitchen beyond, rinsed dishes with deliberate calm. The porcelain clink of fine china drowned out her pulse, her knuckles white under the warm spray of water. She replayed his words in her head. "Tomorrow you'll be gone." Her job was on the line, maybe more than that. But her dignity? That was untouchable. She thought about her mother again, the woman who had taught her to speak truth even when it cost comfort, the woman who said, "Language is not just words. It is the weapon they can't take from you." Tonight, Naomi had wielded that weapon like a blade in velvet. Through the half-open kitchen door, she overheard Gregory mutter to one of his closer allies. His voice was calm, practiced, but beneath it, coiled rage. "She embarrassed me. In front of you, in my own house," the ally murmured sympathetically. "She's just staff. Thought I'd place her." "No." Gregory's voice dropped lower, harder. This wasn't disobedience. It was defiance. "And if one servant thinks she can undermine me, what about the rest? If that spreads, so does rot. No, she won't just leave quietly. So I intend to remind her of her place." Naomi's grip on the plate tightened until porcelain threatened to snap. Every instinct screamed for her to step away, to vanish into the cocoon of invisibility she had mastered so skillfully. But not tonight. Tonight had already broken that spell. She stacked the last dish, dried her hands, and smoothed her uniform. The decision hardened in her chest. She would not leave this house cowering tomorrow. She would force Gregory himself to confront the mirror he'd spent his life avoiding. In the drawing room, Gregory raised his glass again, voice pitched high, forcing bravado. "To victory over every obstacle." His friends echoed the toast half-heartedly. Their minds were not on his victories, but on the look in his eyes at the table hours before. One of them leaned toward him and muttered, "Gregory, You need to control the narrative. You can't afford them whispering about what happened back there. Gregory's face stiffened. There will be no whispers. But whispers were already alive. Guests exchanged glances. The rumor already tangible in the smoke. The maid had won and the master had faltered. Naomi entered quietly to pour more drinks, but this time silence fell when she appeared. The men tracked her movement not as wallpaper, not as blank service, but as shifting gravity. Gregory's eye twitched. He forced himself to laugh loudly, theatrically. "Gentlemen, shall we remind ourselves of what separates masters from servants? Naomi here seems to think her voice carries weight. But in truth, she's disposable, replaceable. By tomorrow, another will stand where she does." But no one laughed. The men drank, but their eyes betrayed them. They knew the truth Gregory feared. He could fire her, banish her, erase her name from his payroll, but not from theirs. Because humiliation has a stronger scent than perfume, and no amount of money masks it. Naomi poured carefully, deliberately. Her face was composed, her hands steady, but her words were sharp when she finally spoke, directed at Gregory, but thrown into the room for every set of ears. "You can remove me, but you can't remove what you saw tonight, and what you saw was more powerful than your wealth." The glass in Gregory's hand trembled slightly. He masked it by setting it down hard on the table. "Watch your tongue." She met his eyes directly, calm as still water. "It's not my tongue you fear. It's the truth it carries." The room froze again. Gregory rose abruptly, cutting the heavy air with the swish of his jacket. "Out, all of you?" His guests blinked, startled. "The party is over. Go." Confusion scattered, but no one dared challenge him. They shuffled out, mutters echoing behind them. Within minutes, the chatter of aristocracy was gone, leaving only Gregory and Naomi beneath the heavy chandelier glow. He paced the room like a caged animal, shadow lunging sharp across the walls. "You think yourself clever," he spat. "You think these parlor tricks of language make you my equal." "No." Naomi's voice floated steady. "Not your equal. Your mirror." Gregory froze mid-step. "You humiliate to hide weakness," she continued. "You laugh to cover fear. You surround yourself with men who nod and clap, so you never have to face who you are when the echo fades." His chest heaved, rage vibrating his frame. But behind his eyes flickered something else. Recognition. The truth he'd buried clawing its way out through her words. Naomi stepped forward, her shadow merging with his. "Tonight you tried to make me small, and instead the room remembered me. It remembered the silence you couldn't fill. Fire me if it soothes you. Tomorrow I will walk out, head high. But know this, my absence won't heal. Your humiliation will follow you, because it didn't come from me. It came from you." Gregory stared like a man unmoored. His jaw clenched once, then again, but no words came. For Gregory Alcott's speech, a weapon of dominance, had betrayed him. Against Naomi, his arsenal was empty. The air between them was electric. The battle wasn't physical, wasn't economic, it was spiritual. A maid had become a truth-teller, and a millionaire had become a man collapsing under the weight of an unspoken verdict. Finally, Gregory whispered, voice cracking, "Get out." Naomi bowed slightly, respectful though unmoved. Gladly, she set down the silver tray with reverence, turned and walked toward the door. Her footsteps were soft, but in each one rang the echo of triumph. Gregory remained rigid, staring into the dark window glass that reflected him back, but his reflection no longer resembled control. It looked fractured, haunted, shadowed by the image of a maid who had dared to speak. And long after Naomi crossed the threshold, Gregory's silence told the story he would never admit. He had been unseated in his own kingdom, not by another millionaire, not by a rival, but by the woman he thought invisible. Naomi stepped out into the night air, the heavy mansion door closing behind her with a hollow thud. The garden lamps flickered dimly, lining the curved driveway with soft pools of light. Each breath she drew was freer than the last, though her chest was still tight with the fire of what she had just done. The cold breeze touched her face, and the scent of night blossoms mixed with distant cigar smoke clinging to her uniform. For the first time in years, Naomi felt she wasn't walking away as someone dismissed. She was walking away as someone who had left a mark. But inside, Gregory was unraveling. He sat alone in the drawing room now, the leather chair creaking at his stillness. The echoes of Naomi's words rang louder than the clamor of his expelled guests. "Not your equal. Your mirror. It taunted him as though carved into every wall. He sat alone in the drawing room now, the leather chair creaking at his stillness. The echoes of Naomi's words rang louder than the clamor of his expelled guests. Not your equal, your mirror. It taunted him as though carved into every wall. His pride surged like a poisoned tide. Tomorrow he would erase her, he told himself. Tomorrow he would call his staff, fire her with spectacle, remind everyone who dictated the script. But a piece of him knew it wouldn't fix what they had witnessed. His friends, they would talk. Already he pictured their whispers tangled over lunch in private clubs, morphing the story into something he couldn't control. The maid spoke and Gregory froze. He pressed his hand against his forehead, the weight of a reputation suddenly trembling. Wealth he could buy, power he could display, but respect fractured differently, and never mended the same. Outside, Naomi walked down the path lined with hedges trimmed like obedient soldiers. A memory struck her. The first day she entered this house, terrified, her mother's passing still fresh. She had promised herself then, endure, save, survive. And she had. But tonight survival had evolved into something else, into victory hidden in defiance, into a kind of immortality that money could never touch. By the time she reached the wrought iron gates, two of Gregory's guests lingered outside, their chauffeurs waiting with running engines. They glanced up at her with something new in their expressions, caution, even reverence. Neither spoke, but their avoidance told its own story. They could not look her in the eye, because what they'd seen tonight refused to dissolve. Naomi passed them calmly, head high, disappearing down the quiet street into the city's hum. Within days, whispers ignited into rumor. The wealthy excel at gossip, and men like Gregory lived and died by reputation. At first it emerged in private corners. Did you hear? The maid spoke fluent Japanese and left him speechless. Then it spread into veiled anecdotes over drinks. They say she refused to humiliate herself further, and Gregory had no comeback. By the week's end, it had reached boardrooms, golf courses, charity banquets. What began as spontaneous humiliation mutated into legend, into parable. Gregory tried to bury it. He fired Naomi the following morning with cold formality, his voice steeled as if rehearsed. But firing her didn't erase her. It amplified her. Whispers doubled because spectacle confirmed suspicion. And among men who thrived on hiding weakness, weakness exposed was contagious entertainment. Naomi, meanwhile, found herself approached in unexpected ways. Two staff from the mansion, who had always spoken to her only in passing, visited her in the days after. They looked uneasy but sincere. "What you did last night," one whispered. "It gave the rest of us something. A reminder." Naomi listened, her face humble though her heart stirred. She hadn't done it to be a martyr. She had done it because silence pushed too far, transforms into necessity. But she realized then that even necessity leaves echoes in others. Her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. A woman's steady voice introduced herself as a journalist with connections in high society circles. "We've heard a story," she said brusquely, "about a dinner party that didn't go as planned." Naomi hesitated. "I don't want to become their story," she said plainly. The journalist responded, "But you already are. The question is, do you want to at least control how it's told?" That night, Naomi sat by her small window staring at the city lights, heart wrestling between fear and conviction. She thought of Gregory's voice, smug and towering, demanding she translate for laughter. She thought of the laughter dying like a fire drowned in water. She thought of her refusal, the quiet that followed, the look in his eyes when his empire had sputtered in silence. And she answered herself, no matter how society dressed it, this was not just a maid's embarrassment of her employer. It was a larger story, one of dignity rupturing through marble floors, of words too sharp to bury. She met with the journalist days later, only reluctantly at first. But as she spoke, careful, precise, her story unfurled larger than she had imagined. It wasn't about one dinner, one man, one jab turned failure. It was about every room she had walked into with grace and left with silence pressed against her skin. It was about the language her mother had gifted her, the armor culture had tried to strip, the persistence of truth even in the hands of someone the world branded invisible. Meanwhile, Gregory's empire began showing cracks. Investors eyed him differently, wary. Whispers carried weight in those circles, not because of truth but because of perception. And perception had always been his true commerce. One evening, alone in his study, he stared again at the paper Naomi had translated flawlessly. It lay on his desk, flattened under glass. He could have destroyed it the night she embarrassed him, but instead he kept it, and that ate at him more viciously than the rumors, because he realized he needed proof, some tether to remind him that what had shattered wasn't fabricated. Her words, her precision, her refusal, and for the first time in his recorded memory, Gregory Alcott felt small in his own kingdom. Naomi, however, felt larger than she ever had. The ripple of whispers had expanded beyond the wealthy and into the city itself, a story of a maid who spoke when the world demanded silence, and the millionaire who faltered under her strength. Myths grow fast where truth strikes raw nerve, and this one had not even begun to reach its zenith. In the weeks that followed, the story spread farther than either Naomi or Gregory could have imagined. But while whispers were currency for Gregory's world, for Naomi, they became vindication. She didn't chase them, didn't amplify herself. She simply lived head high the same way she had on the night she left his mansion, carrying only her dignity. Gregory obsessed. His empire no longer seemed untouchable. Colleagues who once bowed to his voice now second-guessed him when he entered a room. At dinners, conversations faltered, guests watching him too closely, waiting for another crack in the facade. The humiliation gnawed at him relentlessly, because no amount of wealth could purchase silence once truth had been witnessed. In a high-rise boardroom, one investor leaned across the table and said bluntly, "Gregory, respect is the only currency you can't buy." And lately, the pause stung more than the words. He knew what came after. They all did. Meanwhile, Naomi's small act of courage had blossomed into something more. Other domestic workers whispered her name with quiet admiration. In kitchens and service halls, her refusal circulated like gospel. She told him no. She spoke and he went silent. Each retelling softened the fear that silence was the only survival. Each version grew, exaggerations painting her taller, her words fiercer, until Naomi had become, unwillingly, a kind of legend. One evening, alone in her modest apartment, she unfolded the newspaper left at her doorstep. A headline about Gregory's company losing a key contract jumped out at her. Below it, her own story, written under layers of anonymity, but recognizable enough: dinner at the mansion, how one silent voice shifted power. She smiled faintly, not with glee, but with the bittersweet awareness that truth has a way of planting itself wherever soil exists. Later that night, she placed her mother's photograph on the table and whispered softly in Japanese words only the two of them had ever shared. "They didn't silence me. You taught me how to carry words like stone, and tonight they built a mountain." Across town, Gregory poured another glass of vintage cognac he could not taste. Alone now, his mansion wider, hollower, the chandeliers mocking him with their sterile glow. The empires he owned, the friends he bought, none could scrub away the one night a maid reminded him he was mortal, fragile, flawed. And in that truth lived his downfall. For Naomi, though, that night had been more than survival. It was revelation. She had not just refused humiliation, she had written an ending of choice. She understood now what her mother meant. Language is power so long as you dare to wield it. And so the story lived on. A millionaire who tried to laugh at dignity, a maid who refused to bend, and the silence after her words, louder than all the wealth in the room.